Hey folks, it's Ray with Taste Radio. Right now, I am supremely honored to be sitting down with Ben Goodwin and David Lester, the co-founders of Olipop. Ben, great to see you. How are you?
Ray, thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
For sure. David, great to see you as well.
You too, mate. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been a little over 4 years since we last had you on Taste Radio. Not much has changed in your lives. It's pretty much the same company that it was in 2020. And I just wanted to have you back for kind of a check-in on how things are going.
Yeah, it's pretty quiet over here. So you're helping to break up our day. Appreciate that.
David, where are you now? I felt like both of you were based in LA when we last spoke, but maybe I was wrong.
We were in the Bay Area, yeah. So both of us, we started out there, and I'm now in Atlanta. We've been here for 4 years with the kids. It's really nice.
Nice. And Ben, you're up in Portland, Oregon, is that right?
Close. I'm in southern Washington
Okay.
on the Columbia River. So it's like 30 minutes outside of Portland, but the taxes are better on the side of the river, and I live in a really beautiful little farmy spot, which I like.
Do you get to mix up some music out there in peace and quiet?
Yes, I do. Yeah, my studio is on the other side of this wall. Which it was like a bonus room that they unearthed while they were renovating the house, and it's concrete walls, and I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I was looking for.
If listeners don't know what we're talking about, it's because Ben, unbeknownst to me until recently, is a DJ specializing in deep house. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, house techno, down tempo, not that anybody really cares, but it's not really the like EDM-y stuff that is taken off. It's more kind of underground. I used to throw raves and warehouse parties in my late teens and early 20s, and the spirit has not died for me.
But it's not necessarily rave music. I mean, it's the kind of music that
Yeah,
you can
that's
listen
right.
to at your desk while you're doing some work. Just, something to keep your blood going.
Yeah, though I will say, I did DJ our end of year party last year,
Oh
and
boy.
I was, yeah, I know, I was very nervous. It was something that got suggested, and I I turned it down at first. I was like, look, I don't want to be the CEO that forces everybody to like listen to his music. And maybe that still would have been the right call. I have no idea. At the end of the day, it was really fun. At least I had fun, and we actually got the dance floor pretty packed out. So I'm sharing the music where it seems reasonably appropriate.
I can't tell based on David's reaction how the company felt about it. He's pretty stone faced. I
It
mean,
was no, it was lit. We all the younger people in the company were enjoying it, and I was on the dance floor as well. Yeah, Ben and I actually, when we first met over a decade ago, and this is kind of typical of Ben and I because we're quite high imaginative people. We spent a lot of time speaking about music, and then a little bit of time speaking about how to start a company, and then music again for a bit. So, and we've been to see some good gigs together as well, including an infamous one going to see Underworld, but Ben was
Ooh.
very annoyed that I was talking to him too much through the performance. But
I
Okay.
mean, you never. It's a very rare treat to see one of David and I's favorite groups of all time. David gets a couple under his belt, and then it turns into a discourse. And it turns out that you listen to music with your ears, so it really is reading signals.
Geez, I always thought you listen to music with your eyes, but no, that's
I know it. Not everybody knows, but
I'd love to see Olipop sponsoring a Tomorrowland at some point in the near future. That might be fun for you
never,
guys.
never say never, my friend.
Okay. All right. Well, David, you referenced the kids, and it seems like the kids love Olipop these days. Well, they've always loved Olipop, and it's not, I think, because it is a soda brand per se, but I think they consume it the same way that past generations consumed soda. They do it often. They talk about it. It's in a variety of settings, whether it's for lunch or just a snack or, out with friends. And it's really interesting to me because when we first spoke, this word, soda, was actually a bad word I was listening to that episode of ours, and the description that you guys gave was it was the healthy alternative to soda. But I think it was just a few months later that you trademarked the term a new kind of soda. When did you guys realize that you needed to go all in on that 4-letter word, and what gave you the confidence that it was the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take an initial crack, but I know David will have a lot of thoughts about this as well. I mean, it was interesting because, and maybe we discussed this on the last foray. David and I had a beverage venture together prior as well, called Obi, and we had actually called it a probiotic soda because more or less we've been kind of tinkering in the space for a while. And Olipop obviously launched the kind of current functional soda category, but there were kind of the early version of it that in OB. And at that time, we had actually called it a probiotic soda. And we were getting some pushback from our consumers. And however, it was, that was a substantially smaller company, about 500 times smaller. So we were mostly selling the product around where we had actually launched it, which was also the Bay Area. And so we were predominantly addressing a coastal consumer, and we were addressing a coastal consumer that was, this is like 8-10 years ago or something along those lines. So, and at that time, it was the case that a lot of especially the health conscious coastal consumers, our experience was that they didn't like the word soda, but they loved the way it tasted, and they were open to the concept. We just had to finagle a little bit. So when we launched Olipop, we took soda off the pack. We called it a sparkling tonic. That's also not untrue. That's just a different way to kind of describe what the product is. However, in the name Olipop, you've obviously got pop, and pop is the way that pretty much the entirety of the Midwest refers to soda. And we had kind of this hypothesis that the Midwest would actually be more open to the idea of a healthy soda, whereas the coastal territories probably needed more time to wrap their heads around it. However, as the category started to build up some momentum, I think there was actually a shift amongst even kind of your coastal consumers, where all of a sudden the idea that this was a new category, that this was a thing that had healthy and function in it, generated that permissibility. And we were just able to switch over and say, look, we can just call it a soda for everybody now, because there's enough of a baseline understanding nationally to switch some of the verbiage.
I want to get to David in a second, but you know what they call soda in the South, Ben?
Coke.
Okay, call it Coke. See, I mean, I guess you could have gotten away with calling it Ollie Coke. I mean, maybe that'll be the name in the future.
We'll check. I'm sure it's fine.
Okay, David, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but yeah, I mean, your thoughts on the word and why it's such an important term for Olipop these days.
Yeah, I think in my experience with innovation, particularly in consumer goods, consumers are going to put you somewhere, right? If they don't know where to put you, it's too hard. So from the beginning, we were clear of leaning in semiotically to soda, but we were a little, hesitant, as Ben said, around, putting soda front and center on the pack. And we've gained confidence in that. And I think changed perceptions around it too. I mean, if you look at the history of the soda category, it's gone through a couple of evolutions. It started off as a health tonic, changed over the years, and to a certain degree, we're changing it back. It's kind of a third wave of soda, if you like. So, as the brand has grown, as our awareness has grown, as we've educated consumers around, what soda can be, we've really leaned into it. And yeah, I'd say consumers firmly understand us as a soda brand. That's our main kind of source of volume, and where people position us in the category as well. And obviously a huge opportunity with the addressable market there as well.
But it's a soda brand very different from what exists as a traditional soda out there. And the price reflects that. Olipop is a premium priced product. And compared to a Coke or a Pepsi, it's significantly more expensive. That's the wrong term. I don't want to say significantly more expensive. It just costs more. And there's a reason for that. You use better ingredients. You use more expensive ingredients than what you might find in a traditional soda. But you have to explain that to consumers. How has your marketing evolved to the point where you're calling yourself a soda, but you're also having to explain to consumers why it's more expensive because of the ingredients inside?
That's interesting because I don't, I don't, I don't know that we have ever actually gone through a crisis where we've felt like we have to explain it to customers. In fact, it's interesting. The more I've kind of gone down this road, we'll be in retailer meetings, and they're really well intentioned, and I totally understand the place people are coming from. But a lot of times kind of get the question, or it's kind of taken as this kind of common sense thing, like, all right, tell me how you're going to educate the consumer. Tell me how you're going to educate the consumer. And you obviously can't have no plan to educate the consumer. But if the foundation of your ability to sell your product is actually tied to educating the consumer, you're actually like you're pushing your rock uphill. We actually, I think one of the things that's been very helpful about our product is the fact that it's as a concept, it's mentally intriguing and it's a bit sticky, right? Like, so what is this healthy soda? That feels like a contradiction. But once you start to interact with it, it's actually incredibly self-explanatory. Like, oh, the pack design is telling me it's fun. It's telling me that it's telling me that it's healthy, but it's telling me that it's fun first. I drink it. Wow, that really matches that soda experience that obviously 97% of households in the US interact with. And then, oh, I get it. It's like a healthier version for me. And then obviously some of our more core customers are going to do a deeper dive and explore the ingredients more, or understand, hey, this quantity of fiber actually makes a big difference. But I think a lot of times that exploration, to a certain extent, is self-guided. And a lot of it, I think, comes off the back of a customer that has already been provided value and has, to a certain extent, started to become enamored with your product. Whereas if you went out proactively and started trying to hammer people over the head with your health messaging, or relied on, I need to drive education before I developed an emotional connection or value, then I think you'd actually have a much harder time of it. And additionally, I would say that the other thing that Olipop capitalizes on is the fact that there's a massive underlying demand that consumers have, right? Which is, you do have this in the US $42 billion industry with, and David just referenced it, 150 years of history in the United States. It's extremely deep as a category. And so you have all these customers who love, and grew up with soda, but now have a really conflicted relationship with it. And Olipop really helps to resolve that pain and really provide somebody with that full experience, but they're not trading in their short or long-term health. In fact, they're doing the opposite. They're investing in their health. And so you plop a pain resolution system like that into a category that has the second highest price inelasticity in beverage, behind only coffee, and you actually have an equation that works pretty well.
Ben, along those lines, I think about the customers, the typical customer, at least from my perspective of Olipop, and that's the Gen Z consumer, the Gen Z customer. And the whole idea of nostalgia as being important to that generation is really interesting to me. And the way that Olipop has incorporated nostalgia into its branding, its package design, into its flavors since the beginning seems like it was a perfect fit. But you were way ahead of it. I mean, even before someone was saying, oh yeah, like the whole throwback nostalgia is really appealing to kids these days. I mean, you were already there. Did you know? I mean, did you have a sense that this was going to be an appealing characteristic, an appealing part of the brand to this segment of consumers?
100%. I mean, David and I had a lot of conversations. One of the things that we landed on thematically was effectively like modern nostalgia. That is really that is a framework that is really important to the brand. And yeah, it is the case that younger consumers do really enjoy things that seem retro, that have a nostalgic component to them. It's interesting. The Olipop flavors, they have nostalgic elements to the formulas, and then they also have these kind of redefinitions that are ownable for the brand. So there's that modern nostalgia actually takes place inside of the liquid as well. But nostalgia also and emotional comfort are very universal human need states, right? They affect so many different layers of our life and our existence. So you want to build your brand platform, especially if you're going after opportunities large as soda. You want to build your brand platform so that it works with core audiences that are going to be important to you. But I also argue that you want to make sure that you're building a framework that is pretty universal and will stand the test of time. Things like something like modern nostalgia is going to work for the next generations that come beyond Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but it also works for in kind of a Big Ten way with millennials and up the chain as well. So, and that's really important because we do technically over-index on Gen Z, but we also pull pretty significant numbers with older demos as well, and that's great because soda itself is a big tent category, and you want to be able to play in all these different demographics.
Would say, there's a huge emotional reservoir in the soda category, and for us, it was important to tap that. Consumer behavior change is very difficult, and so if you're telling people stop doing this thing that you're familiar with and do this completely new thing, that's hard. And so, for us, we were changing one thing, which is the ingredients, but everything else, that people love about soda, we're keeping the same, and we wanted to celebrate that and meet consumers where they are, and not take away the aspects of the category that people love.
So I got to ask, and I'm sure you get this question all the time: if most people are buying your product because it's fun, because it tastes great, because it makes them feel a certain way, and I don't mean functionally, but just makes them feel a certain way in their daily lives as a part of their lifestyles, then why is the functional ingredient so important? Why is it so important to keep as a part of the brand? Your chief rival has stated that they're going to remove that functional benefit from their product. So why keep it in there?
There's a lot of layers to this to the answer to this question, and I'm sure David and I are both going to have something to say about it. But look, from our perspective, we are a mission-driven company. So the mission and the economic outcome of this business will forever be entwined. And the thing that gives us the extra rocket fuel in our daily endeavors and for the team, and I also think with a lot of our customers, is the fact that we are looking to make an impact at scale. Now, arguably, there is some intrinsic impact in migrating consumers away from traditional soda by itself, and that's awesome. But what the goal of functional soda, and again, we founded the category, so we feel pretty confident in our ability to speak to the goals behind functional soda, is actually to not just be a neutral offering, but to be a contributory offering. And it certainly isn't going to negatively impact you to have that. In theory, it's higher risk. You actually have to do the work. You've got to do the research. You have to put adequate amounts of the right ingredients and store it correctly so that it's actually stable and gets to the customers in the way that you have communicated to them. But all that is actually the right thing to do if your goal is to shift human health at scale, which really is the framework behind our brand. Now, there's all sorts of business reasons that go along with that kind of underlying mission that have utility. So, for example, one of the reasons why we have invested so significantly in a scientific advisory board and in vitro research and stability research with Purdue University, is because we want to be able to continue to communicate around functional benefits, and we want to survive the scrutiny from a regulatory lens and from a media lens deep into the future, right? Like, we have so many customers that write into us that are pretty profoundly benefited by our product. And the last thing that I would be interested in doing is either hoodwinking them or letting them down by removing out something that they've actually come to rely on. So I think there's a lot of utility for it for the business in a myriad of ways, but most importantly, it's literally why we founded the category and why we founded our product.
I think it's very well articulated by Ben there. And, Ben and I have been working together for over 10 years. And, one of the things that inspired me to join Ben was, his focus on mission and impact. And it's inspired a lot of the other people who've joined our business and our investors and our customers, as Ben said. And, talking to some of the, sort of commercial benefits Ben was referencing, value, as you said yourself, right? Like, this product costs more than, regular soda. And, what we're proving out is we have a value proposition that works for people at that price point. We're selling at scale and, mass retailers like Walmart and Target. And, what is it that makes up the components of that value proposition? I mean, the product tastes amazing. Ben is a very gifted formulator. That's definitely the case. I think emotionally, there's real benefit there as well in terms of, that little moment of joy that we provide people within their day. And I think the function also plays a critical role in that too, and our viewpoint is that will be increasingly more so. It's allowed us to grow in a very sustainable way, without a lot of discounting or trade spend. We're in a fortunate position that we're now profitable this year as well. So, all these components and the effort that goes behind it, it's not easy, as Ben said. There's a lot of work gone into it over the years. But we think they're really important in terms of the value proposition that we're providing and why consumers are, so willing to spend on this product. And it kind of shows out in the data as well. I think in the category, 8 of the top 10 SKUs within the functional soda category are Olipop.
And also, Ray, just as a quick note, there's also an aspect, sometimes I think I definitely get a little, and that's not what's happening in this environment, but there's certainly certain instances where I get a little bit frustrated with the cynicism. And I think we should all be a little bit frustrated with the cynicism. Mm-hmm. The reality is that according to the CDC, 40% of Americans have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, right? 70% plus of Americans have weekly digestive distress. And the vast majority of Americans are on one or multiple prescription medications to try to address all these real world problems. And there really is a valid opportunity to shift public health at large, which alleviates a lot of suffering. It alleviates a lot of revenue burden on the tax system, on the medical system. Our levels of disease are so high, it is a national security risk. And so you have these opportunities to help address that with the food that we're putting into our bodies and the drinks that we're consuming. And if we kind of spiral into this like cynical headspace of, well, most of the health and wellness products that are out there, they say one thing, they build a big business off the back of it, then they get challenged and they pull their claims and they pull their functional ingredients because it's safer. Okay, fine. But what are we going to do about all of these people who have really serious health issues? Our goal is simply to say, it has been from the beginning, say you can build an amazing, profitable, rapidly growing firestorm of a business. You can also do it the right way and put your money where your mouth is when you're delivering value to your consumers. And if you marry it correctly, that will actually be rocket fuel to your business, not a burden. And we want to set that standard for the health and wellness industry. So they've got a case study. They realize, like, not only can we do it too, it'll actually be advantageous to our business to do it. And if we don't move to that place, this kind of, CDC also predicts that by 2050, 1.3 billion people globally will have type 2 diabetes, a completely preventable or a predominantly preventable lifestyle disease. So that's that's why it's so important to us that we actually make a real dent and kind of shift this narrative.
You're preaching to the choir, Ben. I mean, we talk about this on the podcast often, which is, healthy products aren't as ubiquitous as they should be. And a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, with the fact that big companies, big CPG, doesn't really have a vested interest in acquiring brands that are doing better for humanity. Let's call it what it is. But to be everywhere, to get to more places, it seems like an alignment with a strategic company is inevitable. It has to be. And I mean, I think this is the elephant in the room, right? If Coke or Pepsi or Keurig Dr. Pepper is knocking on your door and saying, hey, we can take you from here to everywhere. I mean, that's pretty powerful, right? But the problem is they might turn around and say, oh, well, you know what? This whole fiber benefit isn't really going to work for us. And you can't control that. So when you're thinking about the future of Olipop, how much of that plays into your perspective? How much of that plays into your thinking that, we have to be independent for as long as possible, because inevitably, if we do sell, it's going to be a different brand. It's going to be a different product.
Yeah, that's a fair question. And actually, by the way, I really like how you framed that question, because we've gotten asked versions of that, but I actually really liked your framing. So I appreciate that. Look, for us, first of all, there are obviously a handful of different routes you can go. When you've raised enough investor capital, it's difficult to stay private, but there's an exit, there's an IPO, there's a range of different things that you can do. And certainly where we sit now, we're keeping all of our options on the table. And beyond that, the other thing that we're doing is we're managing triple digit growth every year. Back one year, we almost had quadruple digit growth. So that's kept us quite busy. And like, as far as the future state go, I mean, I think that, what's important is, like, I don't think you can, first of all, I think there are ways that you can ensure economic pressures and efficiency pressures are going to be levied against your business, irrespective of whether or not you enter into a strategic relationship or you go public, right? That's just the kind of nature of that's the nature of scaled business. But how you respond to those pressures, or how you prep your business for those pressures, I think can make all the difference, right? So there are ways to scale efficiency against procurement, ways to scale efficiency against co-manufacturing. I think there's also ways to ensure that the consumer base goes actually right back to David's point, which I think was a really good one, around ensuring that there is a understanding in terms of the relationship that's driving your brand, right? Because I think oftentimes in these hypothetical scenarios where there's a bit of a gutting that can happen around the functional offering, there wasn't, for example, like a bunch of scientific research behind that functional offering. One of the things that we're doing right now is we've actually, and you would have seen this in the Bloomberg spot, but we've entered into a handful of different insurance reimbursement networks. And there's two sides of those reimbursement networks. There's kind of the food as medicine side, and there's the food as engagement side. The food as engagement side allows you to actually work with insurance companies to kind of incentivize around preventative measures. And there's actually like a really interesting business model there. But all of a sudden, if you build a couple $100 million section of your business, in theory, that starts to go into these kind of differentiated spaces, but the functionality of your product, the ability for it to actually be proven out with real research, is fundamentally tied to those really interesting routes to market, growing and staying activated, you might find yourself in a fully different equation. So I think there are ways to really kind of mindfully build your business, and there's ways to build your distribution, and there's ways to build your brand and your communications to your customers. And so that as a cumulative whole, kind of no matter where you go, can generate a differentiated outcome than what I agree with you does sadly often happen.
I think it's worth noting as well that what is important for everybody commercially is they look at high growth brands and categories is, what's the equation that's driving that growth? And nobody wants to kill that, right? So if you look at the energy category, for example, you have Red Bull as an
That's a great
independent
point.
company. You have, Monster, Celsius in partnership with, Coca, Pepsi. Nobody has removed the functional ingredient from those products. And it's because they understand it's a critical part of the value equation and the growth is driving those brands in the category. And, I feel like that's what we're showing with Olipop as well. We're leading this category with a 60% share. It's one of the, um, you know, exceptional growth stories within beverage, the last couple of decades. And I think it's a really important part of that. And as Ben said, it's really inspiring thing the way Ben frames it is like, yeah, we want to show that there's a way to do this and kind of have it as a blueprint for others to follow as well. That investing in science, focusing on the mission of what you're trying to do can actually supercharge a business rather than be an albatross that at some point you need to discard.
Such a good point about the energy category, right? Because, you know, Red Bull's interesting, taurine, acetylcholine, caffeine. And then that created a framework by which others like Celsius and Monster and a handful of others were then actually went to laddering up even more ingredients and even more benefit as an offering. And one of the things that allowed that category to do that was the fact that they retained value at their price point. So that there was real opportunity from the ingredients cog side to keep experimenting with additional value for customers. So there's no reason why this category can't do the same thing. And in fact, I would argue if it doesn't, it's not actually achieving its potential.
It's so interesting. This is such an amazing conversation because it almost sounds like one way to future proof the authentic value of your brand is to show that there are people, there's a large segment of people who are spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars to drink your brand, to drink your products for their own health. And to remove that money from the equation would be to, it wouldn't be very capitalist, would it?
Exactly. I mean, we are clear we're not relying on altruism as a way to, you know, protect our concept and our mission. It's actually leaning into the existing structures, capitalism, commerce, profit that are there, but just setting it up in a different way, as you say. And commercially being very successful as well in terms of our productivity per door, which is something which is critical for distributors and retailers. We understand that. The profit that we offer, the footfall into stores and new consumers we're bringing in. In a lot of cases, we are, the growth driver for the beverage category in major retailers now. And that includes, some of the stores, new stores we're going into. Wawa, for example, I think we're the second highest contributor to category growth in that category behind Mountain Dew. Often that's been the issue, I think, for retailers is that they've had to make a trade-off. Then look, there's these better for you products that we want to stock, but the turns just aren't there. Or they're not providing the same revenue growth as some of the other established brands. We're showing that is possible.
I'm glad you brought up Wawa, David. I recall from our conversation 4 years ago when Ben was talking about recently attending a 7-Eleven Innovation Summit. And
yeah,
there was,
oh my God, blast from the past.
Yeah, right. And so it was interesting because you had said at the time, if I can recall, that you were looking for places and channels where Olipop would not work. And those were the best places to learn about how to make adjustments to the brand, how to talk to consumers in a way that would be more appealing to all customers. And it doesn't seem like that's happened, though. It seems like Olipop works in most places it's in, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, I don't, we still haven't, look, it doesn't mean we haven't, you're correct. We have seen Olipop work very consistently in our retailer partnerships. Definitely, it's still been very insight driving, though. I think the motivators that drive different groups has been very useful. when we reference how we need to communicate in terms of marketing, the flavor preferences that are experienced by different groups of consumers or in different parts of the country. So we're still learning everything that we can. And there's no better way to do that than get exposed to different groups of customers that are spread all across the United States. It's actually similar to one of the aspects that I really love about our remote culture, because people ask it a lot of times, you guys have a remote culture, or what are the upsides, downsides? One of the biggest upsides to having a fully remote workplace is we can hire people from all over the country. So we're not just in a Bay Area bubble. We've got Kansas City and Oklahoma and Minnesota, and that also really helps to ensure that we're getting this varied perspective. So you're right, we haven't kind of writ large, we haven't found a massive retailer where the product doesn't work, which knock on wood that continues. But we are certainly learning everything we can, and every new area that we go into.
That's a perfect segue to my next question, which is about staffing. David, early on, and Olipop was debuted in 1998, 2018. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I think back end of 2018 was when we first went into market in 20 stores in Northern California.
How about that? And now you're in 35,000. That must be a trip. No, but early on, what was your most impactful hire? And as Ben referenced, I mean, Olipop's been a rocket ship several times over. I mean, I guess just a rocket ship at different speeds, or more specifically, a rocket ship at the same speed, but from place to place. How do you identify the most impactful hires early on and as you are speeding through the galaxy?
It's very difficult to highlight one individual hire that is critical. I think maybe a couple of broad statements on that. Hiring exceptional talent is probably the most important job in a high growth business like this. So if we can't attract and retain the best people, there's obviously huge parts of business Ben and I are just not touching at this point. And so you need people coming on board that have the technical skills, also absorb the mission and carry the culture that we want to build here as well. And we invest a lot in that. The team did an incredible job. Ben and I are about to fly off in a couple of weeks to a new hire offsite that we do in Northern California, where we invite every cohort of new hires, go through this and spend 3 days in Northern California and get immersed in our business and understand the culture and hear from Ben and I, and also develop a cohort of people that they join with that can help them on their journey through the company as well, because it's crazy trying to keep pace with this growth. And it is something that we find every 3-4 months you have to really get your head up and evaluate, are we resourced in the right way? Does the team need additional support? So that's been a constant challenge and one that we've had to invest a lot of time in as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a very interesting space in terms of talent, because there's a couple of factors impacting us simultaneously. So one, the growth that our business has had, David just made a really spot on point, which is, kind of seasons of change that in a normal growth business might take a year or 2 years. We run through in a quarter, and that's really exciting, but it's also very disruptive in a lot of ways. So you constantly have to stay on top of that, and then and that also affects your team and your leadership team, especially. It's one of those things where you're like going up a mountain, and all of a sudden, if you're going up the mountain at 10 times the speed, the environment is changing so rapidly, and I've been really, really impressed with the maturity of a lot of the leaders in our business who have been open to either taking on new areas of growth because they realize they're a little over their skis, or we've had some folks who've been open to re-leveling as it's been necessary, because and it's also a real testament to not only the quality of leaders that we have, but the quality of the culture at Olipop. that they've been willing to stick around and kind of shift their role as it's appropriate. The other factor that we have playing into our experience is, we had over 90,000 applications last year for 30 roles.
Wow.
This year,
Wow.
our first 6 months, we had 130,000 applications. So it is multiple full-time jobs just to go through the applications. What's great about that is you can absolutely source the best talent. But it also, it makes things a little complex. I think I agree with David's point. There hasn't been a singular hire that's necessarily been the most impactful. But what I would say is focusing on your leadership, and making sure that your kind of executive leadership team, your senior leadership team, they're really fleshed out with the right senior people who are strategic at the level that's appropriate for where they're sitting, is beyond critical. Because David's point, you get we're sitting at north of 150 employees now, and we might have close to 200 by the end of the year, and you are getting to a point where you are really going from a place where you can stand in a room and talk to everybody to, I absolutely must have my waterfall, my strategic waterfall throughout my organization has to really work. And you only are going to be able to achieve that by people who have the raw technical skills, but also really have the leadership aptitude that's required to contextualize and disperse in a way that's appropriate for levels.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
So I was just going to say one point on that, which I think is interesting and worth mentioning, is initiative that Ben pioneered with our executive coach Laura Greenberg, OLU, the Olipop University. And so, it's something Ben has been adamant about from the beginning. Kind of highlighting there that we would be experts in leadership as a business, and we put our money where our mouth is on that front with the OLU initiative, which involves, again, all our senior leaders going to, an offsite in Northern California for 3 days every year to get intensive leadership coaching, and then that continuing on through the year in various cohorts. So, as I say, Ben's commitment to that and the initiative that he's developed with Laura Greenberg has really been fantastic. And to say comparable to, if I go back to my corporate days to Diageo, and I remember we had a program that Diageo were at brand building, which taught us kind of marketing, incredible program. Something like this would rival that. And so it's unsurprising to me that you see this, high standard of leadership and emotional intelligence within our business, because it's something we're investing in.
I imagine a really important job for Olipop is in the realm of marketing / digital marketing and social media. Your following on Instagram is about 330,000 followers, I think, at this point, maybe a little bit more than that. And just staying in touch.
None of it paid for, by the way.
Incredible. 310 to be exact. And how you interact with your consumers, how you talk to them, what they tell you about the brand, what they want to see in terms of new flavors is critical information. But finding the right people to just figure out how to talk to, how to discern what is important, how to take the right advice from consumers, if you can do such a thing, is all really critical information. And it's such a critical role. How do you think about modern marketing, digital marketing, when you are relying on people who might know a lot more about the space than you do, and kind of have to trust them, especially if they're a lot younger? And in this space, in this kind of like business of social marketing, it is usually folks who are under 30.
Ben and I are obviously big social media users ourselves, so we're quite knowledgeable on this.
I noticed you guys aren't on Instagram. Is that there was one strange Instagram account that had both of you on it, or maybe it was just Ben?
Seriously?
Yeah.
Well, I have one that has maybe 3 photos on it, which I had to create because I used to do a bunch of Instagram lives for Olipop.
Okay.
But yeah, I haven't really done anything with
That's
it
the
since.
one. And there's four images, there's 4 posts, and one of them I think is
One's like a
David.
tree.
Yeah, David on
One's
Ben's back, and that's the most liked one, I think.
It's probably Stephen on Ben's back, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question on digital and social, right? I think our team has done a fantastic job on that. I think what we've learned is it's different. So I was a trained sort of brand marketer. That was my career before going into entrepreneurship, and it's a very different way of thinking in the digital space, much faster. There's a reason that most of these large corporations are not very good at digital and social because the thought process is so different. So, we've let the team run with it to a degree, but off a strong foundation of what our brand stands for. I think that's really critical. But anybody who claims to have social 100% figured out, I think is not telling the truth. It's constantly evolving as well, and I think adaptation is key. So what may be working for you at one point, 6 months later, you might find, this is totally different. We started on Instagram. It was a very important channel for us, and TikTok came along, and we had to adapt and figure that out as well.
I just want to make sure everyone's clear on what Ben said about none of it paid for. Let's be very clear. What do you mean by that, Ben?
Sorry, it just means we're not buying users or facilitating any of our social media efforts with bots, which is not always the case.
Okay. I think listeners can read between the lines there. No, it's important. Again, I just had a conversation with Ben Whitty, who's the founder and CEO of Recess, and he talked about how, their pivot from being a hemp-centric brand to one that's magnesium-focused had a lot to do with paying attention to what their consumers were saying, listening to their consumers, and making sure that they were doing the things that were going to keep them happy. And keeping people happy with Olipop seems like really expanding the flavor universe. I think there's 20 flavors that you guys have, or at least that you've released over the years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that sounds right. Because some of them have been limited time releases, but that sounds all correct. I mean, sometimes because I obviously formulated them all. Sometimes I just I stare at the page of all of our flavors, and I just chuckle to myself. You make a great point though, Ray, because yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. Look, if there's anything I want Olipop to be, I want it to be a brand that is extremely customer centric, right? Because everything that we do is built in support of our customers' health and happiness. They're obviously nobody purchasing your product except for your customers. So a great example of that is actually our shelf stable product, which took a really long time to launch, right? So the cold version of the product, which is currently the version that we've actually built the entire company with, it has inulin in it, right? And inulin is not stable at room temperature. So we've been really excited about our product, but there's obviously some intrinsic limitations in our ability to expand it, and our customers have noticed that as well. And we've actually gotten thousands of requests for, hey, I only have so much room in my fridge, and I'd love to be able to pantry load Olipop. Or I want to put it in my kid's lunchbox, or I want to take it with me for the day. I don't want to worry about it. Now, the reality is that the current version, you probably can still take you with you for the day because it takes weeks for the inulin to start to degrade. But we understood the concern. And it actually took about 18 months to develop the new formula because I had to find something that tasted right, was soluble, and we had research-backed ingredients that I could sport, that was adequately novel. But we got there. And it's a great opportunity now to respond to consumers. There's also, in our new multi-packs, the per can quantity of fiber is 6 grams instead of 9 grams. That was also listening to customer requests because there's a lot of folks who consume Olipop more for that, hey, how do I replace my soda? I love the fiber, but I want to drink it more like traditional soda. Well, drinking 2 or 3 Olipops in a day will really rapidly get you to extremely high levels of fiber. And so we wanted to ensure that we still had an amount of fiber that we felt really good about, that performed really well in our in vitro trials. It still exceeds what's necessary to capture the excellent source of fiber designation from the FDA, but had a little bit of a lower amount so that customers could drink it more in keeping with how some of them were consuming regular soda. And with one shelf stable product, we're able to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And we feel really confident about the decision because it's consumer request and insight led. And that's how you can do something that's that substantial, because it was a big effort on our parts to develop and launch that product. But we never wavered from it being the right thing to do because we knew we were responding to consumer requests. I feel really, really happy about that. And I'm going to continue to listen to our consumers as we go.
And I imagine it opens up a lot of new distribution opportunities for Olipop in the future. I mean, it could be the top selling or the most distributed version of Olipop, given that there is no cold chain that you need for the shelf stable products. So excited to see where that goes. You know, for our listeners, a lot of whom are early into their brand's development or early into the development of their brands, you know, I'm sure they'd want to ask you guys a million questions, but I always look for at least one piece of advice that you could share with, you know, someone who's 0 to 3 years in, and, you know, the kind of, you know, thing that they may not have thought of, they may not have considered as they have been building their brands. You know, David, what would you say to that person, starting with you, something that they really need to consider that they may have overlooked early into their brand's journey?
Yeah, I mean, tons of empathy for people and admiration for people going, you know, taking that decision. I think, you know, Ben and I talked about this before. I feel like entrepreneurship is much personal as a professional journey. And so you learn a lot about yourself. So taking the decision to leave your other career, whatever it is, taking the decision to start something, getting to your first million in revenue, huge accomplishments from which you will learn an incredible amount. And so, you know, just kind of sitting in that acknowledgement and empathy for yourself of that achievement. It's really hard. You know, Ben and I, this is our second go at it. You know, and so people say, wow, this has gone really quick. The second go, we made a lot of mistakes the first time, and we had a lot of self-reflection and personal growth. You know, and had to show resilience to kind of stick with it as well to get to this point. And it's not easy. So, you know, you will make a lot of mistakes along the way. It's important to stay alive as a company. If you stay alive, you know, sometimes it might look a little ugly. Sometimes it, you know, might not be very elegant the way you're approaching it. But, you know, if you can stay alive and learn and reflect on those things, you know, you might get somewhere interesting.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so funny how like stay alive sounds kind of strange, but it's so important. Lance Collins, who's the founder of a lot of amazing brands, including Fuse and Body Armor, had said something very similar. It's like, look, at some point you got to figure out, how am I going to make this thing break even? And how am I going to stay alive to that next level of development? So thank you for sharing that, David. Ben, any thoughts that you'd like to impart to our audience before we head off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that David's point is a great one and can be even expanded a little bit, right? It's that mental health is a really kind of unaddressed aspect of entrepreneurialism, because entrepreneurs oftentimes have got to be like, go, go, go. I'm always winning. You know, you're always selling. And so it can be extremely isolating. And I think actually hand in hand with that, simultaneously, not to add a bunch of extra pressure to somebody who's already going through something like that, you know, your ability to develop interpersonally is extremely important, because if you are successful, and you want to sit in a highly influential position inside of your business, at some point you actually have to, you never stop being an entrepreneur, but you actually shift into a leader of others, and you start to shift into more of like a systems engineer. And it's a really different part of your brain. And there's all sorts of competencies that come into play. Something that, to David's point, kept you alive in year 2, now in year 4 or 5 is actually like very disruptive to your ability to create like a team that functions really well. And so, doing that work to keep yourself well integrated as you go through that journey, so that you're able to stay where you want to stay for the duration, is really, really important. Or sometimes it's time to know where like this is my sweet spot and this is not my sweet spot. And that's kind of piece number 2, which is, look, there's 3 things that you really need to make a company succeed at the mechanical level. You need an excellent product that has really good product market fit. And then you need the ability to make it scale from like a long-term margin standpoint, from a volume standpoint, just all the mechanics associated with that. Those 2 things are hard enough to get right. Then once they're right, though, it's all about your team and the culture you build with your team. And once you kind of wrap your head around that and realize, like, I have to get the absolute, best people that I can, that are really motivated by the vision, that themselves, like your ability to assess the psychology and the EQ of the people you're working with, which, by the way, is oftentimes directly related to your ability to assess and work with your own psychology and EQ. All of that melds together into the unsung important aspects of running a company, which is really working with your people. And if you invest in those ways, if you invest in your own emotional health, you invest in the psychology and the health of your people, when it comes time to say, hey, I'm actually exiting my areas of competence from a whole range of different places, you actually have people that you can trust to pass them off to. But at those aspects, and then the other one, which is obviously running out of cash, like those are some of the biggest, ends up becoming a synergistic superpower for your business if you invested in it, and then you invested in yourself, or it ends up becoming an Achilles heel that really pulls everything back. So those are worth, and again, people who are just dodging around trying to stay alive, the last thing they want is a bunch of other somewhat ambiguous stuff dumped on their plate. But I can't possibly overstate its importance, especially as you cross those thresholds and get out into the later years.
Powerful stuff, and really important that our listeners hear what you're saying, Ben. And I think they are, and I think incorporating it into their businesses is going to be really helpful. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you both for just an incredible conversation. I am really grateful that you took the time to sit down with me today. Thank you so much. I'm going to cheers with an Olipop Barbie peaches and cream flavor. This is delicious, by the way.
Thanks, man. We've been going this whole time. I didn't even see the open one. It's been burrowed away.
I've held it in my hand. I hope it's not too warm at this point. There's still some chill to this can. So no, in all seriousness, awesome. It's delicious. And for folks who haven't had this yet, I hope you can get your hands on one because it is really good. David, Ben, thank you so much again. I hope we can get together in person in the near future, perhaps at BevNet Live in December in Marina del Rey. But until then, it's been an honor. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ray.